All right, folks, welcome to this evening office hour, scheduled to coincide, at least attempted to do so, with the onset of some really active weather in California, at least in parts of California once again. And if you're in the right part of the state, you are experiencing it already. There are very active thunderstorms just along and off the central coast. So right near the inflection point in the California coastline, between Santa Barbara and San Luis Obispo County. So we've got some really active satellite and radar imagery to take a look at this evening, some interesting weather model data, and also a little bit of a recap. On top of this, it's been a really hot couple of days once again. After a cooler period, once again, we have temperatures breaking triple digits in places where that starts to become a bit more unusual as we get into, have to check the calendar date, the last week now in September. So we're now officially in late September, and it's over 100 degrees. As we often see during autumn heat waves, the gradient or the differential between temperature inland and the coast is much weaker than usual. So unlike your average 100-degree day Sacramento afternoon in July when it's foggy and 55 degrees in San Francisco, today it's around 90 degrees in San Francisco. So it is quite hot. In fact, this is the hottest day of the season in San Francisco proper, and among the hottest day of the year so far in other parts of near coastal California. Not the hottest day of the year in the Central Valley, but notably, there's a lot of 90s and 100s around, and they do extend almost all the way to the coast. Also, in most places, it's not a dry heat, it's notably humid, and that is actually making the heat feel worse than it is in a very real way. The heat index is equal to or greater than the actual temperature, which is unusual for California. Often, the heat index, this composite index that takes into account the effects on the human body of both temperature and humidity, in a dry heat part of the world like California is most of the time, most of California anyway, the heat index, the apparent temperature, sometimes it's called, is often below the actual temperature. So it might be 105 degrees, but the air might actually feel like it's 99 degrees because the humidity is so low. But right now, in almost all of California, the humidity is high enough that you're actually feeling that 90 or 95 or 102 degrees. The humidity is not making it feel any cooler. In fact, if you're relatively close to the coast or in some parts of the Central Valley where there's moisture trapped, the humidity is actually making it feel hotter than the actual air temperature. So we have some cases where the heat index, the actual temperature might be 90 or 95 degrees, but the heat index might be closer to 100, which again is common in more humid parts of the world during summer, but that is not typically what we see in California. And I think what it alludes to is that there is a more humid, moist air mass than is typically the case, certainly in September, but really at any time of year. And that is a bit of a precursor to what we're going to talk about this evening, which is this fairly widespread thunderstorm outbreak that's going to further develop in the overnight hours, extending from just the immediate central coast where it is now, expanding northward into the Monterey Bay area, southward potentially into Ventura, and maybe Los Angeles County if we're lucky, depending on your view of luck. And then maybe also northward across the San Francisco Bay Area in the overnight hours into Wednesday, where it might stick around in parts of central and northern California interior spots from the Bay Area eastward to the Sacramento and San Joaquin valleys into Wednesday. Maybe even a slight chance into Thursday in a couple places. So this is not a typical pattern. Humid heat late in the year, near record temperatures along some parts of the coast right now, and a pretty good chance of some fairly intense thunderstorms later tonight. By the way, if you are anywhere from about Los Angeles County northward to Santa Cruz County, if you look out the window now, particularly if you look north or northwest from LA and south from Santa Cruz Mountains, you're going to see some really interesting clouds out there. And depending on what the satellite looks like when we pull it up in a couple of minutes, you might end up seeing some interesting clouds farther north into the Bay Area right around sunset, although if you're up in the North Bay, it might take a little bit longer, might happen mostly after sunset. But again, looking south, you look a couple hours into the future, essentially, with a pattern like this, and so that might be something that's worth doing this evening. As I joked online earlier today, it's a cool cloud day advisory out there. This is one of those days where there's going to be predictably interesting clouds and other things going on in some parts of the state. It's already been an active period in Southern California, especially with tropical moisture from former tropical storm Mario last week, causing major flash flooding in the deserts of southern and eastern California and in the San Bernardino County mountains as well. A lot of folks said that event was quote-unquote a bust. It didn't materialize, but in fact it did. It just did not bring heavy precipitation or dramatic thunderstorms to much of coastal California, but it did bring lots of clouds and some light rain and really unusual humidity and stagnant air conditions to much of the state, but it was quite a dramatic storm in the mountains of San Bernardino County in particular, as well as the southeastern deserts. There were a number of major road washouts. I'll show you some images of this. There's a couple of state highways that are now closed because they don't currently exist. And there were homes destroyed from a major debris flow downstream of one of the recent burn areas in San Bernardino County. There was also at least one fatality associated with the flash flooding. So this was no joke. It was a serious event down in far southern and southeastern California in particular. Now, the event we're talking about now, probably not as much flash flood risk with this one, although there's always an isolated chance. These will mainly be wet, although fast-moving thunderstorms, so they could still spark a wildfire or two along the south coast, not because they're completely dry there, but because there will be lightning strikes outside of the rain cores of these storms. The rain cores won't hit everywhere, but the lightning strikes might. And it's pretty dry out there after some relatively hot days. There has been some recent precipitation, so it's not extremely dry down there. But there is some possibility. As you go north into the Bay Area, this is another situation where if there is lightning up north in the Bay Area, it's more likely to be associated with less rainfall, but still some lightning. And also, due to the recent heat and lack of recent rainfall up in the North Bay in the general San Francisco Bay Area, northern coastal range vicinity, it's actually been drier up there recently than down in Southern California. It's also been quite hot. So we've seen a rapid drying of the fine fuels, the grasses. In fact, we even had a couple of unusual, not very consequential, mind you, but unusual grass fires today during this coastal heat wave in places like West Marin. There was a wildfire right near the Pacific Ocean in the grass. It's already contained, not a problem, but you don't see too many out there. You're usually under the fog bank. Similarly, there have been a couple of vegetation fires along Interstate 280 on the peninsula in the neighborhoods there. So it's getting a little bit crispy out there. So if there is lightning overnight tonight in the Bay Area and nearby places, there's a slightly higher chance that could lead to some new wildfire starts. We're not experiencing a severe drought. It's not record dry out there, but it is definitely dry enough to sustain wildfire starts if there is lightning that makes it up north of about Monterey Bay, because those storms, if they do make it that far north, would be drier, less likely to produce wetting rainfall, and the antecedent conditions are now significantly drier there. So still doesn't look like an extreme fire weather event, but the likelihood of at least a few wildfire starts are probably ticked up a little bit since yesterday because conditions are drier, the lightning might extend a bit farther north than expected, and the northern fringe of those storms looks a bit drier. Contrarily, there could be an instance or two of flash flooding very locally along the central coast, probably not nearly as problematic as it was in southeastern California with Tropical Storm Mario last week, but nonetheless, there could be an isolated flash flood event somewhere along the central coast tonight into tomorrow, just as there could be an isolated dry lightning sparking a fire there. So both are possible there. No flash flood risk north of there, Bay Area, northward. There just isn't enough moisture, but there could be some lightning, some light showers, and maybe some dry lightning, or dry-ish lightning, if you will, igniting a couple of fires. Had an interesting chat with Anthony Edwards from the San Francisco Chronicle yesterday, too, about another weird thing that might happen in the overnight hours into the early morning hours tomorrow. And I'll show this on some maps, but due to the position of this low-pressure system and the fact that there's a pretty active cluster of thunderstorms west of the central coast tonight already, that might send some outflow boundaries, some winds radiating outward from the storms northward, And because of the coast ranges, think about how tall the coast mountains are rising right under the ocean, Big Sur coast, for example, several thousand feet. You might actually get some trapped gravity waves. This isn't anything too exotic, but they're kind of cool. They're these nice repeating cyclical undulations, and we might see some gusty winds that come in closely spaced waves radiating outward from that as those potential gravity waves get trapped by not being able to move inland because of the topography of the coastline, and not being able to move upward because of a stable layer, because, as I talked about last time, these thunderstorms will be mostly elevated. So they will not be thunderstorms with cumulus clouds based near ground level. They may have bases of 5, 7, even 10,000 feet locally. So elevated cloud bases, below that level a lot more stable, above that level a lot more unstable. You can get weird things that happen when you have an unstable layer above a stable layer, and that might result in some strange, gusty overnight winds from the south in places like Monterey and San Francisco Bay Area. So let's just dig into it. Have a lot to show, so maybe I'll just start showing some imagery. Okay, so you're going to see my screen, infinite mirror, and then first thing I'd like to show, and I bring my drawing tool up just to reiterate and reorient, is this enormous marine heat wave which persists across, again, the entirety of the North Pacific Ocean, extends all the way from South Korea and Japan. A super typhoon, by the way, is making landfall in China this evening, fueled by warmer than average waters in this part of the world as well. I went through the Philippines earlier. But very warm water all the way from southeastern Japan, southeastern China, the Koreas, Japan, and all of the western Pacific Rim, all the way north and eastward, including the Aleutians, the Gulf of Alaska, the Bering Sea, the Gulf of Alaska, as I mentioned, and then all the way to the west coast, now including all of California, all of western Mexico, including Baja, and then all of Central America, all the way south to the immediate coast of Peru. So again, you can draw a through line literally from Peru along the entire Pacific Rim, really, at this point, the entire Pacific Rim, except for portions of South America, are much warmer than average. So that's remarkable. But the epicenter still appears to be in the Kuroshio current extension region in the West Pacific, and then a secondary lobe now just west of and including the immediate California coast. The water is really warm out there, and if I zoom in a little bit, you get a slightly better picture of this for California. Again, here we are. Water temperatures, again, this is in degrees Celsius, so you see a lot of essentially light to dark oranges. So we're talking essentially about this range, 2 to 3 degrees Celsius above average along and off the immediate California coast, locally a bit warmer, again multiplied by 1.8. And so we're getting 4, even locally 5 degrees Fahrenheit above average water along most of the California coast. That's a lot. That's a major marine heat wave, and just look, it's this whole region. That is playing into what's going on because the weather system we're talking about today is taking this trajectory into California. And if you look, it's essentially tracking over much warmer than average water. It's not the only reason we're seeing unusual weather. We would probably be talking about the possibility of some thunderstorm activity, maybe isolated, even if this water wasn't as warm as it is, but I would guarantee that it is likely to be more substantial and more widespread than it would have been had these water temperatures been several degrees cooler, as they were earlier in the summer, by the way. A quick look at watch duty suggests no real fires of significance in California. There's a couple of new starts today. Here's the one in West Marin I mentioned that's now out. Here's the one down at 280, which doesn't look like it's doing much. It's already knocked down. So really nothing to talk about in California. There's a new fire up in the northern valley. Unfortunately, this one does all of a sudden look like it is doing something. The Sunflower Fire in Tehama County, southwest of I-5 and Red Bluff. If we bring that up, although actually if you bring up the most recent camera image, It's still burning, but it already looks like they're catching it. So still not much to speak of. But a lot more fire activity up in Oregon and especially Washington. I mean, man, look at Washington and Idaho and British Columbia. It's really unusual to have this much fire activity now as we get into, we're almost into October now. So I will show on satellite imagery what's going on here, and maybe that's a good next thing. I'm going to look first at the Pacific Northwest just to review things. Well, actually, let me look. Here's the Pacific Northwest view. You can see that there is a lot of smoke in western Washington, kind of a little bit of a smoke out in some parts. All these interior valleys full of smoke, all the interior valleys up in BC, some up in the Sawtooth range as well, another active fire down in southwest Oregon. If we look at shortwave and look at the thermal signature these fires are giving off, they don't look too impressive right now, except for, again, these timber fires in central Washington. And maybe this one in Idaho. So again, there is more activity in general up in the Pacific Northwest than there would typically be. There was a major fire in the Olympic Peninsula that ran almost 10,000 acres a couple days ago. That was a big forest fire run, high intensity run, again, in September. Not normal for this time of year. But really, if we go down to California, no real smoke to speak of unless you happen to be immediately adjacent to one of those smaller fires. But here's what's of interest. And as I mentioned, again, here is San Francisco for orientation. Here is Monterey. Los Angeles is down here. And as you can see, right now we have some real active clouds right from about LA County, which is here, to central Monterey County. And as you can see, all this is moving in this direction. So you might say, well, where's the low pressure system? Well, it's somewhere in here, and you have the flow, as you might expect, in a cyclonic direction around that low pressure system. So right now, what we've got is this activity, and by activity I do mean thunderstorms. These are active thunderstorms, some of which are now producing lightning along the Santa Barbara coast, the Santa Barbara Channel, over the Channel Islands. Could even see a lightning ignited wildfire on one of the Channel Islands tonight. I wouldn't be too surprised. But these are starting to extend. So there's no lightning yet north of San Luis Obispo County, but that will change. It's likely this lightning will sort of propagate northward slowly through the overnight hours, and yes, it might up into the Bay Area. This is why I was saying, by the way, if you look south from the Santa Cruz Mountains, you're going to see these pretty interesting clouds. Maybe too if you look south from the North Bay, but they're farther away. But they're coming, and over the course of this session, they may be developing directly over Monterey Bay. In fact, in the last couple of frames, it looks like they're almost on your doorstep in Santa Cruz. And again, it's all moving up from the southeast, and as this low pressure system moves northeastward, like this whole flow pattern is going to start to propagate like this. So I think that there's probably going to be a cutoff to the activity somewhere around here. So I don't think that San Diego, Orange County, sorry, you saw your activity already. Maybe LA County, isolated storms possible, but more likely from Ventura westward, Central Coast certainly, Monterey County certainly, and then maybe north of this point too, up into the Central Valley, North Bay, later on into tomorrow. But this is a pretty classic setup. These bubbly clouds, if I only saw this, I'd say we're in for a thunderstorm outbreak without being 100% sure. If I bring up the radar, which is what I'm doing now, we can confirm this, that there are now widespread thunderstorms in this band, with a couple of isolated storms outside of this corridor. But for now, the storms are mostly from essentially Santa Barbara to Santa Maria, and then mostly offshore. The most active thunderstorms are offshore, but as you can see, there are some lightning strikes occurring on land in Santa Barbara County right now. There were some in San Luis Obispo earlier. All of this will move northward. It might back build a bit into this region in Ventura and LA counties later on, but I would expect to see widespread lightning, again, widespread lightning overnight. Probably, I think it's probably going to be most likely in this region, and I'm kind of drawing off the map to indicate it goes up into Monterey County, but there is at least some isolated potential down in this region, and then also up into the San Francisco area to the north, which is off of this map. But again, if we zoom in, what we see, these do not appear to be dry thunderstorms right now. There are locally heavy downpours probably between Vandenberg Air Force Base, Santa Maria, and the Santa Barbara County coastline. So if you're on, I think that's 101 here, probably just had a nice heavy downpour, thundershower. But as you can also see, there's some lightning strikes, for example, this one, that are striking completely outside of where the heavy rain is falling. So that lightning strike could well have started a fire. Fortunately, it's right off of 101, so it's got good access. But you see my point. Another one over here. Any of these lightning strikes could spark a fire, or if you're right under the downpour, maybe even a local flood. So flooding, not too concerning with this one, but it's possible. The likelier outcome is some pretty dramatic, visually dramatic thunder showers, and maybe some dry lightning strikes. By the way, if you do go out to take a look at things, photography, or go to the beach or something, do be aware that the primary danger with these kinds of storms is, of course, the lightning itself. Don't discount that. People do get struck by lightning every year, and people have been struck in recent years in California, and it usually doesn't go too well for you if that happens. So even if it's a great photographic opportunity, be aware that if you can see lightning and thunder, you're theoretically at risk of being struck. Of course, the likelihood goes up the closer you are to the storm, but as we've seen literally right here, you can get bolts from the blue. It might literally be sunny where this lightning strike just struck, for example. Now, you're relatively close to the storm, so that should be an indicator. One safe place to be, well, structures, permanent structures, enclosed structures are usually good places to be safe from lightning. Don't speak on corded phones is the advice that the Weather Service still gives, even though that sounds like a public safety announcement from 20 years ago, because I don't think too many people have that. But there are other things we could be plugged into. If your cell phone is charging, you can get struck through the cord. If you're on a computer with a wired mouse, believe it or not, that sometimes happens. But the more relevant advice for lightning safety, by the way, is if you are out and about, closed-top metal-roofed vehicles are generally quite safe. Not because they won't get struck by lightning, they absolutely will get struck, but if you're entirely inside of the vehicle when it gets struck, it's very likely that you'll be fine because of the fact it acts like an imperfect Faraday cage, and the extreme current associated with a lightning strike is redirected along the external outer shell of the vehicle. So it's not safe to be sitting on top of your car. It's not safe to be stepping out of your car and forming a path for the lightning to go through the car, through your body to the ground. But it is safe if you're inside the car and still ideally not touching anything that's electronic and connected to the outside, like a radio dial, or if your phone is plugged in to your charger, for example. So car is a good place, a good safe place to go watch. Here's another bolt from the blue, by the way, that could potentially start a fire, for example. So we definitely are seeing those live on this radar now. By the way, from an electromagnetism perspective, the thing that makes metal-roofed vehicles safe from lightning strikes, not perfectly safe, but probably close to 99% safe if it truly has a metal roof and you're actually inside of it, has nothing to do with the rubber tires. It could be on blocks. It could be on the ground. You could just be sitting in the car with no wheels at all, directly on the ground, and you'd still be protected because it is not the tires. They're not doing much insulating work. Think about it. If a bolt of plasma can travel through tens of thousands of feet in the atmosphere, literally miles, and all the way to the ground, do you really think an inch or two of rubber is going to do much to insulate? No, it doesn't. It is the metal shell, the fact that most vehicles have a nice, broad metallic surface. The current will flow through the outside of that surface into the ground. Fun and potentially useful fact if you're ever stuck out in a storm. Car or truck is a good place to be. This is, by the way, if you work outside, if you're a firefighter, etc., this is why often the advice is get in your work vehicle if you don't have anywhere else to go. If you're out there working in the wilderness or the woods, often that might be your only option, but it is a pretty good option. All right, so public safety announcement over. Let's see what else is going on. I think this is really the only radar that's particularly interesting right now, but let me just pull up San Francisco just to see, and you can, okay, it's fairly interesting still. It's far away, but you get a nice view of it from the north. The San Francisco radar, again, there's nothing going on in the Bay Area yet, but the Mount Umunum, yes, it's the Mount Umunum radar in the Santa Cruz Mountains located about right here, is looking south and seeing this huge thunderstorm complex. And again, all of this is going to move north later. Okay, so what is actually going on meteorologically speaking? Here is sort of an overview of what's going on. This is the 500 millibar geopotential height anomaly map, meaning essentially the relative warmth or coolness of the entire atmospheric column. Above average heights means the atmosphere in its lower half is generally warmer than average, and the atmosphere and the reverse negative anomalies mean the atmosphere is generally cooler than average. So here's our low, here's our ridge above it. We have a bit of a blocking pattern here, kind of classic. Well, so here's the low. As I go forward through time, here's earlier today. Here is approximately now. You can see it's moving slowly towards the coast. It's weakening a bit, but it is still making progress, very slow progress as we get into tomorrow. This time tomorrow, the low is just south of Santa Cruz, so it has not made a lot of progress. It's just sitting near the Bay Area. There will be some thunderstorms on the eastern flank of this low tomorrow. That will include probably, again, parts of the Central Coast, but also the Bay Area and Central Valley. So this is going to be a interesting weather watching day. Then that will eventually move inland, dissipate, and then the interesting weather goes away thereafter, although recent solutions have suggested this might actually drift again over Southern California. There's a slight chance it could bring up some interesting weather in Southern California as it just kind of sits around going into the weekend before moving eastward. Then we potentially get the first, or maybe the second, depending on how you define it, autumn-like trough of the season. There is uncertainty, but it might bring a few light showers to Northern California, which would be beneficial from a fire season mitigation perspective. We'll see what happens. It'll also bring some strong gusty winds, and it could be followed by the first offshore wind event of the season, and then by more heat. In fact, there's a pretty strong heat signal as we go into early October. Yes, I know, but here's that 490 decameter ridge or greater in the ensemble average going into early October across the southwest. That is nothing to sneeze at. That's a pretty significant heat signal once again. So what might happen is if we go, here's the ensemble look at this. Again, that low pressure system affects California certainly through tomorrow, and then if it drifts back southward over Southern California, there could be a surprise or two this weekend. Then we get that trough in Northern California, cooling, maybe some showers up north of San Francisco. And then we get a strong warming trend once again, potentially, the exact magnitude of which is TBD. But again, it's really hot right now in some places. It'll be near or even briefly below average before warming back up again to above average after that. So this certainly looks like the September outlook of warmer than average overall in California is going to verify for virtually all parts of the state, including the coast, unlike earlier in the summer. And it also looks like the early part of October is going to start out on the warm side as well. In terms of precipitation, so here's that event right now. There are some locally heavy downpours right in parts of western Santa Barbara and San Luis Obispo County. Only very light showers or sprinkles elsewhere, but those light showers and sprinkles might be associated with lightning. So thunderstorms still across portions of the Bay Area, Central Valley with little or no rain. Those could spark some fires given how hot it's been and how dry it's been. Those fine fields, those 10-hour fields, those grasses are pretty dry. 100-hour, 1,000-hour fields, these larger diameter fields, trees and logs in the forest floor, dead and down branches, those are not as anomalously dry. They're near or just slightly drier than the seasonal average values, but then again, seasonal average values are pretty dry in September in this part of the world, so there could be some fire activity, and the likelihood does look a little bit higher than it did when I took a look at this yesterday. Okay, as I move forward, we see there's a slight chance of a few showers this weekend in Southern California as that low moves back in, nothing too crazy. And then here's that chance moving into Northern California. about 7 or 8 days from now. And actually, that's a bit better than a chance. That actually looks like a pretty good shot at a soaking rainfall along the north coast, maybe the Shasta region, with a chance of showers maybe as far south as the Bay Area before things probably completely dry out again. So that could turn into a slightly more substantial rain event, or it could turn into a less substantial rain event and more of an offshore wind event. We'll just have to see. Doesn't look super extreme either way. This does not look like it'll be a fire season ending rain, except maybe along the north coast. So I don't see any imminent end to fire season for this part of California. So it includes most of the North Bay, southward really, all the way into Southern California. Doesn't mean we're in extreme fire risk territory by any means, but it means that if we did get an extreme heat wave or a widespread dry lightning event or a major offshore wind event, all of which could potentially still occur this season, fire season's not over yet. And I think a lot of folks up in the Northwest thought that fire season was over weeks ago, but it certainly was not, based on how those fires popped right back up. So a few more things I wanted to show. Here's an unofficial map of places that may or may not be experiencing near record-breaking temperatures. Some people have asked. Well, there is one location right now. San Jose may be breaking the daily high temperature record. It's currently 97 degrees, and the daily record previously looks like it was 95 degrees for the date. So it is an indication that we're bumping right up against the top of what is nearly record-breaking. There's a bunch of stations along I-80 from Concord, Sacramento, or roughly along I-80 corridor, Marysville. They're not breaking records, but they're within they're within a couple of degrees, so within 3 degrees Fahrenheit of the daily record. So again, an indication this is certainly not a record-shattering heat wave, but it's in a couple of isolated locations. It's hitting daily records, and it is near those records in other places. More notably, it's humid, and so it actually feels hotter than it is for once, which is not typical. Usually it's a dry heat. This time it is not. Finally, I wanted to show a couple of tweets from regarding last week's events. Sorry for that horrible sound. That was, I don't know why they added that audio. But this is I'm going to maximize it. This is a clip from Caltrans. This is State Route 38. This is the level of damage. I'm going to pause it right here. That is very significant damage. Obviously, the road is gone. In fact, the land below the road is also gone. So this is a major repair project. Look at the size of the boulders here. It's almost car-sized boulders from this debris flow and flash flood event that completely washed out the state highway in the mountains. I believe this is down in San Bernardino County. And I think this is drone footage, which is pretty cool. That's a good use of a drone for sure, since there's no way to get there safely otherwise. Here's the downward look. You can see now the creek is back to a trickle. So just imagine how violent this debris flow flash flood was this past weekend with those isolated but extremely intense tropical downpours. In fact, it appears that a few locations may have experienced their single wettest hour on record in Southern California. This is difficult to measure. We don't have very many hourly precipitation measurement sites, but what it appears to be is that the China Lake, for example, they have an hourly ASOS monitoring system, and they did experience nearly 2 inches of rain in an hour, which is the heaviest rain hour ever observed in that desert part of the state. And I suspect that also happened in other parts of the deserts with this event. We just, if a tree falls in a forest and there's no one there to measure it, it still fell, but we don't know that it did. And that's exactly the case here. This gives a good perspective. This really did wash out quite a large chunk of the road. This is not a minor washout at all. This is the mountain is not there anymore where the road once was. That is pretty remarkable footage. I'm actually just watching this in its entirety for the first time myself now. I knew it would be interesting, but yeah, this is one of the larger highway washouts actually I've seen in a while. This is on the scale of what we've seen in recent years along the Big Sur coast during atmospheric river events. So this is not just going to require dumping some dirt or some rocks down the embankment. This is going to be a major engineering project to reopen this highway. So you get a sense of this. State Route 38. All right, and then there's another, this is from San Bernardino County Fire, and a sort of an overview of what happened during this event. Fortunately, nobody died in this portion of the event, although there apparently was at least one fatality on the highways in Southern California from flooding, driving into flooded roads. You really just shouldn't do that. In fact, there's pretty remarkable footage, which I don't have rolled up in front of me, of somebody doing that in this debris flow, literally trying to drive through the mud to save their pickup truck. Fortunately, it appears that they did not get washed away. They presumably survived because there were no major injuries with this event. But it's a great example, if you see the footage, of what not to do. This was a notable debris flow in Forest Falls and Oak Glen because it actually did destroy structures. It didn't just flood them or make them muddy. These buildings are condemned, and these include not a huge number of them, but still 3 single-family homes destroyed, one with major damage. Often when you have major damage, it's, for insurance purposes, just as good as destroyed. It's a write-off. And then another 10 homes that were damaged or affected to some degree, along with some commercial structures. So again, not the largest event we've ever seen, but then again, there aren't that many people living in these canyons, and so it's actually remarkable that after all the debris flow events we've seen following the 2024 fires in this part of the state, that this one was by far, I think, the most destructive in the fact that it actually destroyed structures, made them uninhabitable. Okay, so let's take a look. Well, I'm just going to glance back at the radar, and I'm actually going to put it back on Vandenberg radar, and I'm going to leave it here. I'm actually going to do something. Well, let's just see. No, I'm gonna leave it on for a minute, and then I'm going to go answer some questions, and then maybe we can return to this if there's interest. So again, that line of thunderstorms is now training. Here's a meteorological term. So what does it mean to train? Well, it means imagine that these were railroad tracks, and I'm going to draw not so well, but moving in the same direction at the storm. So you can imagine if there were a train, which I'm not even going to try drawing, it would go along the tracks in parallel with the tracks, right, in that direction. So when we talk about training storms, what we mean is that the axis of movement is such that it looks like it's as if they were trains along tracks. So they're moving along the same regions over and over again. You can see it's not the same storm. These are actually pretty fast-moving storms. It's not that this cell is just sitting in one spot. That cell is, in the first frame is already over by the coast. So it's zipping along, but they just keep back building along the same corridor of movement. And that's when we call it, when you use the term training, for training thunderstorms. It's not a typical use, a common use of the word. It's actually the secondary or tertiary definition. It literally means as if by train, as in the transportation vehicle, not training as preparing for something or some other use. So anyway, more dry strikes west of Solvang. So again, I would expect that a couple of these have probably started fires. We may or may not hear about them because they may or may not do much. They may catch them early. But let's just take a look, actually. If we go to watch duty, are there any fires? Not seeing anything right now. Okay, so I'm going to go back. You're going to see my face full screen again. I'm going to answer some questions. Great to see a lot of folks on this evening. By the way, it's always helpful when folks like these streams while they are live, that the algorithm likes that. And to the extent we want to build an audience, which I think we all do, it's certainly one of my goals, it's really helpful when folks are able to do that. Also, if you are interested in subscribing to the channel, this is a great time to push that subscribe button as well. And remember that if you do want to be notified of live streams, you can follow me on social media. I usually announce them in advance. But if there's a live breaking news type weather or disaster event, sometimes I'll go live without a lot of notice. The only way you're going to catch those is if you're both subscribed and then have notifications on. It's a separate second step that you got to do. I wouldn't have designed the user interface that way, but then again, I'm not an employee of Google. Okay, Let's see here. Oh, and the last thing I almost neglected to mention is that, as has been the case for some time now, this channel is sponsored by Reask, a climate tech company that is rethinking extreme weather risk in a warming climate. I always have a link to their main page at the end of these videos once the archived version is uploaded. All right, let me scroll back, see the questions. They're coming in fast and furious. The first question of the day was from Agamemnon. Yeah, want to make sure I got that right. How might the Pacific Basin heatwave affect West Coast weather this winter? Well, I talked about this a little bit last time. There's some uncertainty whether it persists. So if it goes away, well, it can't really exert an influence anymore, right? But to the extent that it persists, at least for the next month or two, we'll talk about the later winter later, it might mean that early season storms, well, there's two dueling or countervailing effects. One is that it is likely that the initial storms that we're seeing will have more moisture associated with them. In fact, we're already seeing that right now. As I mentioned, this offshore low, I think, has more moisture and more instability. So already it's potentially affecting this week's weather. It's certainly affecting the warmth and humidity at the coastline. That's unambiguous. There's a 100% chance of that. It's already happening. But I also do think it's juicing up some of these early season storms. We've seen some unusually convectively active or bubbly, you could call them, lots of cumulus activity in these storms. If you warm the lowest levels of the atmosphere, which inherently happens by passive heat transfer between the ocean surface and lower atmosphere, and you add extra moisture to it, you often make it more unstable. It doesn't mean you get more thunderstorms automatically, but if a system comes along that's otherwise favorable, like we've got right now, it can result in really increased activity. So, as I've mentioned before, the atmosphere, as it warms, acts like an increasingly large kitchen sponge. It is capable of absorbing more and more water the warmer it is. That's not just true about climate change. It also explains why places near warm, hot, or hot oceans have a lot more moisture in the air and a lot more rain than places that do not, which is usually true of California. It also explains, in most parts of the world, why you get much more intense downpours in the warm season than in the winter. Again, California is a weird outlier there because we get almost no precipitation in the warm season in most places, although notably, again, the most intense single hours of precipitation in most of California actually did occur during summer. And we actually just saw that again happen. Technically, mid-September is not summer, but it's also not winter. It's still the warm season with that tropical storm last week producing some of the heaviest downpours. So a warmer atmosphere in general, per degree Fahrenheit, so for every degree Fahrenheit warmer atmosphere, you get about 4% more moisture in it when it's saturated. So it's not saturated all the time, but if it is, once we're talking about 4 or 5 degree temperature anomalies, Fahrenheit-wise, as we are over the open ocean right now, we're talking potentially, about 4 or 5 times 4. So, that's 15 to 20% increase in moisture. That's nothing to sneeze at. That can be a significant influence. But the problem is, the countervailing effect is that this pattern of warming, not through the direct thermal effect, but through the displacement of the storm track by shifting or weakening the latitudinal differential temperature, which is what drives the jet stream, that upper altitude band of winds that steers storms. The stronger the gradient in temperature from the equator to the pole, the stronger the jet stream. Ergo, the weaker the gradient between the equator and the pole, the weaker the jet stream, and in many cases, the more north it is centered. Well, this North Pacific Basin heat wave, it's record warm in the North Basin, where the background temperatures are coldest, and it's actually near or below average temperature in the tropics, where the absolute background temperature are warmest. So we're not accentuating the difference between the mid-latitudes and the tropics, we're de-amplifying them. So we're warming where it's coolest and cooling where it's warmest. We're getting a flatter temperature profile, might see a weaker or more northward shifted jet stream. On the other hand, these things are so complicated, it's difficult to foresee. So what I would say is there's a slight chance that we see fewer storms, but if you will, juicier ones. Certainly we'll see warmer land temperatures and more humid conditions for as long as it persists. We're already seeing that now. Does not mean we'll see a wetter winter or a wetter fall, because that mainly depends on the frequency of storms, which is dictated by the jet stream, which might have the opposite effect. But if we do get storms, There'll likely be a bit more precipitation associated with them, and they'll likely be associated with heavier downpours. Mighty Mia asks, Daniel, please say this heat will end soon. I'm melting on the San Francisco Peninsula. There should be some relief, although it will be gradual, and the humidity will remain for a while, although the peak temperatures will come down. So it might still be really muggy and uncomfortable for a few more days, but as I mentioned, that trough coming in will bring drier air next week, and also cooler air. Maybe even a bit of cool rain, not hot, sticky, humid rain, as we're getting in some places right now. And Mighty Mia pointing out that the need to get air conditioning stat. This is one of these humid heat events in coastal California are actually one of the major drivers in people who never thought they would need air conditioning historically in California, or even still don't most of the time today, but occasionally during these weeks like this, you really kind of can't live without it. This is driving a really big surge in installation of air conditioning, or I'll put in my plug for, if you're thinking about putting in air conditioning, why not put in a heat pump instead, and then replace your forced air heater with something that can also provide air conditioning in one unit. I swear I'm not getting kickbacks, but the reason I'm framing it that way is that these are really energy efficient. They're kind of expensive to install. There are some tax incentives right now, which are unfortunately going away at the end of the year, I believe. That's a whole nother can of worms. But these are really cool devices. Essentially, it's an air conditioner that can run in reverse. So an air conditioner in reverse is a heater, and an air conditioner running normally is, of course, an air conditioner. So the same device can heat and cool your house at a very energy efficient way without directly burning any fossil fuels. They're electric, so you hook up to the electric grid. If you got solar panels, you can run your own air conditioning, you can run your own heating. So that's my climate scientist plug for heat pumps. They actually, and people don't know this, they are also air conditioners. So you're not just paying all that money for a heat pump, for a heater, I should say. You're also getting an air conditioner out of it that's very energy efficient and climate friendly. Yeah, Susan also reflects triple digits in northern Marin. So done with it. Yeah, no kidding. That's not comfortable, especially because it's relatively humid. Some places will, in fact, as Loretta mentions, drop 20 degrees tomorrow, although if you drop from 100 to 80 and it's still really humid, that can still be pretty uncomfortable depending on where you are. Matthew already got the gradient question, so that would be an A+ answer on the atmospheric dynamics exam. Melting also in the LA area, says Eastern Sierra Skies. Julia's looking forward to a Bay Area cool-off tomorrow. Definitely, although watch out for some thunderstorms. Again, that's not common. And that's something that we typically don't see significant rainfall following such hot temperatures separated by just one day. That's rare in the Bay Area, but we might see it in a few spots overnight. Yeah, Mark mentions missing the delta breeze here in Brentwood. The pattern right now is so weird that it's difficult. There's just not much of a gradient. There's not enough of a pressure differential between the coast and inland to generate that delta breeze right now. Matthew mentions there was a nice lightning show last Friday on the coast in Eureka on Fortuna. So that's pretty rare on the north coast. East to west moving thunderstorms. Not common. And as Matthew mentions, some rain up in northwestern California, definitely possible early next week. There's a comment that there is 10% more water vapor in the atmosphere than when I was born. Well, I believe that could very well be true. I don't know how old this particular commenter is, but since that has happened in the last 50 years or so, or even less actually for 10%, that's possible. That's within the realm of possibility. So, food for thought. That's not a small change on global scales. Thomas mentions hot in Sonoma County today. Glad finally got a mini split this summer. Obviously, you're not everybody can do the whole heat pump thing. Depends on your living arrangement. We don't, for example, own a home, so we're stuck with whatever the landlords have got. So not everybody has that choice. Not everybody has the privilege to have air conditioning. But I do think that there's this raging debate in Europe. By the way, I don't know if anybody has ever heard of this, but it's kind of a bit of a joke, but also not a joke, that air conditioning is kind of rare in Europe in many settings. A little less so in, say, like the southern Mediterranean, where it's hotter and more humid. But in Central Europe, it can get really hot and humid in summer. Western Europe increasingly as well, as we've seen more and more extreme heat waves there in a warming climate. Not a lot of air conditioning, and there are tens of thousands of people a year in Europe who probably experience severe health outcomes or death, up to and including death, as a result of not having access to air conditioning. So this is something, by the way, that I think that the United States gets right, is that air conditioning is something that people who live in hot, humid places should have access to, because it's a basic health need once it gets to a certain level of heat for a lot of people. So it would be nice if we had more access to energy efficient ways to achieve this, including heat pumps and other modalities. But air conditioning, I would never fault anybody for having it. That would be hypocritical, among other things. But I think that there is a real reason. We've learned more and more about how the physiology of the human body responds to humid heat, and it's not good. And the inability to cool off at night in particular, which is when a lot of people who are maybe trying to be energy efficient or particularly economical will turn it on. That's pretty critical for basic rest and health with human physiology. Having a safe, sufficiently cool place to sleep in is really physiologically important and can reduce the risk of all sorts of illnesses. If you can tolerate hot in the daytime, that's one thing, but get that cooling at night if you can. Some folks checking in, looking in different directions for the clouds. Again, if you're in LA County, look west or northwest. If you're Monterey County, northward, look south. Those are where the interesting clouds are. If you're in Santa Barbara or San Luis Obispo, look anywhere. Look above your head. "102 in Novato today, Northern Marin," Susan mentions. That is quite hot, again, considering it's not a super dry heat. Comment from Bad Drivers. Altocumulus castellanus is what I'm seeing on the Firewatch camera south of the Bay Area. I'm seeing that too on satellite, so that makes sense. I'll take a look south. I'll take one more look before I finish the session today. Question from Matthew. Can the Mediterranean summer climate zone of California expect to see more summer rainfall in a warming world? Seems like the last 10 years have had more episodes of summer rainfall than previous decades. I think that last statement is probably objectively true. There have been some notable instances of summer rainfall, particularly in Southern California, although not exclusively. The jury is still out, but how's this? My colleagues just published a study out of your Merced, suggesting that the likelihood of thunderstorms and lightning probably will increase almost everywhere, including much of California, during summers in the future. That's not quite answering the question, because we all know that those thunderstorms don't always bring a lot of rain in California. But I do think that the general idea that there could be more interesting weather or convective weather, there might be something to it in the late summer and early fall in particular. Doesn't necessarily mean more rain. It probably means more lightning and more chaos in some ways. It also doesn't mean we're suddenly going to flip to a wet summer climate. So when I talk about, think of what a doubling of the frequency of summer rainfall would look like. In San Francisco, it might be from twice a decade to every 3 years. Still very unusual, but that's still a notable change. If you go from something you might experience once a decade to a couple times a decade, that's still notable. So long answer is it's complicated. The short answer is probably not substantive rainfall, but maybe more thunderstorm events, wet or dry flavors, depending on the year. By the way, folks, this came up on the Weather West blog comment section earlier today, but relative humidity is not a good way to measure how humid the air is. For example, there were a couple of weather stations in Central California today where the relative humidity, I believe, was about 28% at one location and 86% at another location. Would you believe me if I told you that the humidity was actually exactly the same in an absolute sense at that two stations at the same time, even though one of them was reading 80-something% humidity and the other was 20-something%? How can that possibly be? Well, the humidity that actually matters in most contexts, not universally, is something other than relative humidity. I actually don't like to use relative humidity except in the relatively few contexts where it's critically important. Absolute humidity, a better measure, dew point, is actually a measure of humidity. So you see it in degrees, so it might be the dew point is 64 degrees Fahrenheit, for example. It's a measure of the temperature at which dew forms. So if you cool the air to what temperature would it form condensation? In that case, 64 degrees. But here's why I say the humidity at those two places was exactly the same. The dew point at the location that had a humidity of 28% and 86%, the dew point was 63 degrees Fahrenheit in both locations at the same time. How can that be? One of those spots was much hotter than the other. Relative humidity is just telling you how much moisture is in the air at a given moment relative to how much could be in the air at a given moment at saturation. So 100% relative humidity, meaning you couldn't put any more water vapor in the air if you tried. You're at saturation. If you put any more in, it's just going to start to condense and fall out of the air, or to condense into liquid droplets, at least as a cloud. That's what fog is. You've reached that condensation level and you've gone just beyond it, so it's starting to visibly condense out as droplets, as fog droplets. So those two locations had exactly the same absolute humidity, 63 degree dew point. The relative humidity was wildly different, 86% versus 28%, and I would argue that they both had the same mugginess. Both of those locations, it would have felt really muggy. 63 degree dew point is actually quite a lot of moisture in the air. This is, by the way, yet another manifestation of the expanding atmospheric sponge effect. In the inland valley location where the humidity was only 28%, the air temperature was near 100 degrees. In the coastal location where the humidity was 86%, the air temperature was only about 70 degrees. But in both places, the amount of absolute water vapor was identical, but the relative humidity was wildly different. So the inland place was only at 28% of saturation, meaning that you could have packed 80% more water vapor into the air. Because the air is so much warmer, it has a much higher ceiling on how much water vapor it could hold than that coastal location. So that's another meteorology 101 lesson in there. Also a science communication challenge, that the most commonly communicated metric regarding humidity, so relative humidity as a percent, is my least favorite way to communicate humidity, because I think it tells us the least about what's actually going on in the atmosphere. It is important for some things. It's if you want to know how close you are to fog, for example, or for fire weather, the relative humidity can still be a helpful measure. But from a meteorological perspective, we work with specific humidity, meaning absolute humidity, and the most common way to interpret that is the dew point. Paul Garcia mentions, is confirming small bands of clouds coming up to Santa Cruz. I told you they'd be coming, and I'll look one more time, see what's going on satellite before I run out. Tim Lister mentions second brief but intense rain band go through Santa Barbara in the last 10 minutes. Only 0.04 inches total. So by the way, the benchmark for dry lightning is 0.1 inches. So if you got lightning with those downpours but only got 0.04 inches, that is technically considered dry lightning. Thomas asks, I think this is in reference to when I was talking about using a metal roofed car as a relatively safe shelter, even in an impressive thunderstorm. Does it kill the car? Well, the answer is lightning does weird things. Sometimes the cars are totally fine, literally just totally fine. Other times it does kill your car, but it generally won't kill you if you're in the car. So it can kill the car, blow out all the electronics. It can even blow out the tires, blow out the windshields, fry all the electronics. And if you were in it and not touching something connected to the outside, you are probably still safe. That's the amazing property of this outer metal skin effect, where all of the dangerous current gets directed just around the outer surface of the metal, even if the metal is less than an inch thick, which it would be in most vehicles, obviously. It doesn't matter because the current wants to flow on the outer edge of it. Now, if you put your hand on the outer edge out the window, then that's a different story. But Christina asks, any chance of storms for San Francisco tonight or tomorrow? The short answer is yes. More likely late tonight into tomorrow, but yes. I talked a little bit, Professor H, about that trough next week. Looks a little interesting. I don't think it'll be dramatic, but could be some rain up in northwestern California. Cooler temperatures, lower humidity, at least for a few days before the next potential heat event out there. All right, I'm going to skip through the rest of the comments since I don't want to go too far past the hour tonight. There's a comment that the state may have contracted out for repair of Highway 38. That suggests it's presumed to be a pretty complicated job. A lot of comments coming in, so I'm just just updated. There's way more comments I realized there was. All right, I'm taking more of them than I thought. All right. Yeah, Matthew mentions, unlike previous seasons where it's dry all September and October, this year we're seeing some rain all over between the dry periods before the true winter rains come. I think that's true, although it is important to keep in mind, particularly in central California, that there's a lot of places that have still missed out on essentially all of the rain so far this season. So there are some places that have seen literally zero and will likely see literally zero rain for the next 2 weeks. So your mileage may vary a lot depending on where you are, and ironically, it's the middle part of California that might still see the longest extension of fire season right now. It's been wetter in the south and in the north, but not so much in the middle. Apologies, can't quite get to all of these questions this evening. No fog at the Golden Gate. Again, 'tis the season, but also this is an unusual pattern on top of that. It's a question. I've seen some models showing peak storm threat in the Bay Area during the early morning hours Wednesday, but others say it could be afternoon when daytime convection occurs. What do you think is more likely? I think it could be either or both. So this is one of those situations where I don't know, but I think the chance of thunderstorms is well justified in the Bay Area, and it could come either with this initial weakening wave or a secondary, more pop-up kind of event later tomorrow. So again, there's a full 36 hours to come with potential thunderstorm activity in the Bay Area, I think. Most likely tonight and then into the early morning hours and then again tomorrow afternoon. Mary mentions, I have POTS, and nothing triggers it like heat, especially humid heat. I can say that from personal experience because I have that issue as well to go along with that auto-inflammatory disorder. As, by the way, does every single other person I know who has some sort of significant autoimmune or auto-inflammatory condition. That is a fairly large class of people who really do depend on active cooling to stay functional when it's hot and humid. Among many other any number of kinds of conditions or states of being that make one more susceptible to humid heat in particular. But dry heat at a certain level takes its toll as well. There's several other folks pointing out the same thing about the POTS, which is essentially a form of nervous system and circulatory dysregulation that makes your body do some strange things when it's under stress. That's the very non-medical authority description, by the way, which I'm only even indulging in because I have that issue myself. Another question about thunderstorms in SF tonight or tomorrow. There's a much higher chance than usual, so I'd say at least 1 in 3, maybe 1 in 2 chance. That's pretty good for San Francisco. Yeah, it's a good point from Professor H. The difference between the relative humidity and dew point, there's a gas tank analogy. Your gas gauge is like the relative humidity. It tells you how full your tank is relative to how full it could be, but it doesn't actually tell you how many gallons of gas you have. So, if you have 100-gallon tank is some semi-truck or something versus a small European 2-door car, maybe 100 gallons versus 7 gallons or something. 100% full in one of them means 7 gallons, and 100% full in the other means 100 gallons. 50% full in one is 3.5 gallons, and 50% in the other is 50 gallons. So the percent does not tell you what you need to know about how much gas is in the tank. Mark mentions above Davenport watching it roll in. Just like 2020, well, I know that brings up some scary memories. There's some superficial similarities, but the main difference is we do not have a severe drought ongoing in the Bay Area right now. We just don't. It's been hot and it's dry recently. There could be some fires, but the good news is the background state of things is a whole heck of a lot less dry than it was back then. Those fuel moistures really do matter, and they are not extraordinary right now. I am happy to report. As Christina mentions, lots of POTSIs here. I wonder what that says about the prevalence of inflammatory disorders these days. I won't speculate. All right, so I want to bring up one more. I want to bring up the radar one more time. So let me just show folks what's going on. See how things have gone. All right, so here's that radar one more time. Again, we still have that training line of thunderstorms. Now we got some lightning strikes right along the coast too, literally along the coastline. So far over land, lightning strikes remain constrained to Santa Barbara County, but that will change later. We will eventually get lightning over San Luis Obispo and northward into Monterey County, maybe back southeastward, back building into Ventura and LA. Overnight hours into tomorrow, probably also up into at least the Monterey Bay Area and maybe the San Francisco Bay Area too. So it looks, this is a very active view. This is quite an active thunderstorm outbreak, and it's just getting started. It's going to continue, as I mentioned, to lift northward with time and maybe back build a little bit, but that's a little more iffy. I zoom out, you can see the scope of it. There's also some storms, by the way, out there, way out over the open ocean, southwest of the Channel Islands as well. Could see some lightning in the Channel Islands overnight. Some showers now over southern Monterey County that weren't there when I started this live stream, so it's making northward progress. And then one last thing, take a look at the satellite. Once again, we see those storms, the northward flank. There's, as folks were mentioning, some altocumulus castellanus clouds developing right over Santa Cruz right now. You see that in there. So if you, probably not that dramatic of a view tonight from the North Bay, although it's a nice evening. It's clean air, clear skies, no fog, that's rare. Probably not too many clouds to see unless you got a really good south view. But once you're in the Santa Cruz Mountains southward, Santa Cruz Mountains, if you're up in the mountains and you have a good view of the ocean, look south and you're going to see this huge mass of thunderstorms. In fact, if you're in Monterey or Santa Cruz, just after sunset, that might be a good time to go do some lightning photography because the storms will still be safely far away, especially if you're in Santa Cruz on the beach. Go to the beach, look south, you'll see some flashing. For the next few hours, you're far enough away from lightning not to have to worry about getting struck. But you'll see it out over the open ocean. So I'd say the winner for the storm viewing competition today is probably going to be, in the next 2 or 3 hours, look south from the beach in Santa Cruz or Monterey. And also maybe look northwestward from Santa Monica. There's no storms there now, but if you look west, you might see these storms after sunset flashing out over the open ocean. Of course, you'll see flashing along the central coast, but there you might actually get struck by lightning, so don't do that. Unless you're in your, what again? Your metal-topped vehicle. All right. I think I'm going to call it there. I'll bring it back. Say goodbye to everybody. I will be traveling next week, so I will not have any scheduled live sessions unless there is some major emergency or unexpected development. I'll consider it, but otherwise I will probably see you not next week, but the week after. We'll talk more about the fall and winter then. So thanks for joining me. Enjoy the thunderstorms if you're a weather watcher out there. There could be some dry lightning strikes. These are going to be most likely from the Bay Area northward. This does not look like an extreme fire weather threat, but it's also not a negligible fire weather threat. It's somewhere in between. The good news is it doesn't look like we're going to follow this up with an extreme heat wave or strong winds, so that's good. There could be some lightning-started fires, but more likely this will be an interesting weather event producing relatively few hazards except for the lightning itself. So as long as you can avoid being struck by lightning, this is an interesting event to watch for the weather geeks out there. Great cloud watching probably tomorrow all the way from LA County up through Sacramento and all points in between. So keep an eye out, and I'll be watching from afar. So I will see you all next